Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Thank you for joining us tonight. All right, this right here, these 10 pages, represent the biggest news in the country today. This is the criminal complaint filed today against 19-year-old Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the surviving suspect in the Boston Marathon bombing. And this 10-page criminal complaint is big news for two reasons. It's news for the incredible details of the allegations contained within it, and it is news because of the simple fact that it exists. Let's start with the news within. The complaint describes in heart-stopping detail exactly what authorities uncovered by scouring surveillance footage of the bombing itself. Quote, approximately 30 seconds before the first explosion, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev lifts his phone to his ear as if he is speaking on his cell phone and keeps it there for approximately 18 seconds. A few seconds after he finishes the call, a large crowd of people around him can be seen reacting to the first explosion. Virtually every head turns to the east toward the finish line and stares in that direction in apparent bewilderment and alarm. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, virtually alone among the individuals in front of the restaurant, appears calm. He glances to the east and then calmly but rapidly begins moving to the west, away from the direction of the finish line. He walks away without his knapsack, having left it on the ground where he had been standing. Approximately 10 seconds later, an explosion occurs in the location where he had placed his knapsack. The criminal complaint filed today also adds terrifying new texture to what we knew about the events leading up to Dzhokhar Tsarnaev's capture and his brother's death. We knew the brothers were accused Friday night of carjacking a man driving a black Mercedes SUV after their photos had been released by the FBI. And the carjacking victim was ultimately able to call police from a nearby gas station where Dzhokhar was captured on a security camera. Here's what we did not know about that victim's ordeal until today. According to the complaint, here's how the carjacking went down. One of the suspects pointed a firearm at the victim and stated, "Did you hear about the Boston explosion? I did that." Then, again, according to the complaint, after stopping at an ATM to try to withdraw money from the victim's bank account, the two men and the victim then drove to a gas station convenience store where the two men got out of the car, at which point the victim managed to escape. So the carjacking victim was not released. He escaped, and he was able to do that because, according to the authorities, both brothers left him alone in the car at the gas station after telling him they were the Boston Marathon bombers. We also learned, through today's court filing, that in a search of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev's dorm room yesterday, authorities found, quote, a black jacket and a white hat of the same general appearance as those worn by Bomber 2 at the Boston Marathon during the bombing. So, the 19-year-old surviving Boston Marathon bombing suspect is not just an alleged criminal bomber murderer, he is an alleged extremely sloppy criminal bomber murderer. For all that incredible detail, this criminal complaint filed in federal court today against Dzhokhar Tsarnaev is big news, but it is also big news simply for existing as a criminal complaint filed in federal court today. Now, this should not be contested terrain in American political life, but the fact is, it is contested terrain. There should be no question that an American citizen accused of committing a heinous crime on American soil would be charged as a criminal in American civilian court. But there are political forces trying to make that a question. As we watched this all unfold last week, it looked to me like we were headed toward a fork in the road where, particularly if the suspects turned out to be foreign nationals, we might very well skid off into a legal netherworld of indefinite detention or military tribunals. Even after we knew that the one surviving suspect was an American citizen, a cadre of U.S. senators, people sworn to uphold the Constitution, were calling for him to be tried not as an American citizen suspected of a heinous crime, but as an enemy combatant. And so, this complaint, being filed in federal court today, was a victory. It was a victory against the demagogues who have sought to denormalize what should be normal and expected. It was a victory over these forces of hysteria and panic that have tried to destabilize what should be stable, routine, expected. Because today, in moving forward in civilian court, the Obama administration treated the efforts of certain vocal Republicans to troll the president into engaging in a lawless departure from established process and precedent as exactly that, as trolling on behalf of a ridiculous and illegal proposition.
He will not be treated as an enemy combatant. We will prosecute this terrorist through our civilian system of justice. Under U.S. law, the United States citizens cannot be tried in military commissions. This is absolutely the right way to go and the appropriate way to go. And when it comes to United States citizens, it is against the law to try them in military commissions.
And it matters that the White House is treating the idea of holding an American citizen outside of the American legal system as what it is, which is crazy and unacceptable. And it matters that appears to be where Americans stand on the issue, too. When asked just last week right? In the midst of the aftermath of the Boston bombing, with the images and videos of the horror there at the top of everyone's mind, which worries you more? The government will not go far enough to investigate terrorism because of concerns about constitutional rights, or that it will go too far in compromising constitutional rights in order to investigate terrorism? More people answered they are more worried about the government going too far. Today is the first day of a big, important test for us as a country. A test of whether we will, as a society, demonstrate courage and resilience and thoughtfulness and compassion and a resolute commitment to justice with all that word entails, or whether we will succumb to the calls of demagogues who would have us react with self-suspicion and lawlessness and overreaction. And when Johar Tsarnaev was charged with this criminal complaint today at his hospital bedside and read his Miranda rights, that was an important moment in this test, because while there's more to this test than this moment, we did learn in this moment that we're going to try this guy according to our laws and values, as the sloppy criminal he is alleged to be. Joining me at the table is Donald Borelli, former FBI special agent and COO of the Soufan Group Security Consultancy, and Vince Warren, executive director of the Center for Constitutional Rights. It's great to have you both here. All right, so I referred to unnamed trolls, Republican senators, who were calling for enemy combatant to be applied to this 19-year-old suspect. I want to just play a little bit of sound from Senator Lindsey Graham, who is probably the most outspoken about this. Take a listen.
I believe our nation is at war. The enemy is radical Islam, defined as the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and affiliated groups. The question I have regarding this case, is there any association between these two individuals and the groups I just named to allow enemy combatant status to be conferred upon the suspect in Boston?
Don, you and I were talking a lot last week as this investigation was unfolding.
Right.
What is your reaction to that?
It seems to be that there's a notion among certain people in Congress that having a criminal justice system that's effective is incompatible with gathering intelligence. We've seen so many cases where they both can work together. For example, the David Headley case, Bryant Venus, Faisal Shahzad, Najibullah Azazi, all of these guys have been convicted in federal criminal court, and all of these guys have been intelligence bonanzas to the intelligence community. I mean, and the list goes on. So if done smartly, you can have your cake and eat it too. And this is why I don't understand sometimes about, I think there's a misconception that it's either all intelligence or all criminal and never the two shall meet, and that's wrong.
The Center for Constitutional Rights has been working for years, since 9/11, in the wake of the nether region of law created by Guantanamo, etc., to try to wrench our system back squarely onto legal footing. Were you worried last week about what would happen if and when we caught the suspects? And what was your reaction today to the charges being filed and to Lindsey Graham's calls of this nature being largely, I think, marginalized and ignored?
Well, first of all, I'm really shocked. I don't know why Lindsey Graham hates the Constitution as much as he does, but he does. But I think getting back to last week, I was deeply worried, and I think folks on my staff at CCR were deeply worried that this was going to go in a very different way than it ended up going. There was a lot of discussion around Miranda, a lot of discussion about enemy combatants, and I think that, given the heinous crime that happened in Boston, that folks like Lindsey Graham and frankly, I think the political sideshow that developed around calls for this and calls for that really did not do justice to the people that are suffering in Boston right now. The best solution is the Constitution. The Constitution is not the enemy. It's the people that commit these crimes. And and the last piece is it's deeply important that the trial and the mechanism that we have is full and fair. That's the only way that we can, as a society.
Can I also I don't want to give this more credence than it deserves, but just one follow-up question. I mean, can you just dub someone an enemy combatant? What
George Bush did.
What legal? Well, yes, right, exactly. I mean, that's the question, right? Is that a legal maneuver that Graham was advocating? I mean, what Carney said today at the back and forth of the presser was, it is simply not legal to try an American civilian for a crime committed on our soil in a military commission.
And it's not for lack of trying with the Bush administration. But I think that's absolutely correct, that it is absolutely separate and apart and not connected to our Constitution that we try people that are American citizens that have committed crimes in anything other than...
Accused of committed crimes.
Exactly. But accused of committing crimes in anything other than U.S. courts for that purpose.
So you just mentioned Miranda. So the big thing that happened today, there were two remarkable events today. There was the filing of the criminal complaint, which I was waving around, and they released a suspect of a procedural hearing that happened actually at the bedside in the hospital with a federal magistrate who was brought in. That federal magistrate informed Johar Tsarnaev, the 19-year-old suspect, of his rights to counsel, and there was actually defense counsel present. My question to you is, he was apprehended Friday night. He's been in and out of consciousness as far as we can tell. He has a throat wound, it appears, so he's writing things down. The administration has made use of a public safety exception in not reading him his rights. And I want to read from a memo in 2010 that went out to the FBI from the Justice Department and says, there may be exceptional cases in which, although all relevant public safety questions have been asked, are there other plots, other bombs, etc., agents nonetheless conclude continued unwarranted interrogation is necessary to collect valuable and timely intelligence not related to any immediate threat, and the government's interest in obtaining this intelligence outweighs the disadvantage of proceeding with unwarranted interrogation. Don, do you think this was a judicious use of this asserted authority in this case?
I think it is. I think this was appropriate in this case because it's not just what is the immediate threat around Boston. It's also the larger threat that this person may have access to that type of information, other people involved in the plot overseas, other areas that could have co-conspirators, other cells, if you will. So I think the government was given this tool, the Quarles exception, which seems to be appropriately named given all the discussion about this. But and so the government should use every tool available in the toolbox in this, as long as it's used smartly and with caution.
And you think it was in this case?
I think it was in this case.
Yeah, there's a huge danger here, and I think I'll give the government all the credit for using federal courts instead of military courts. But the important piece that we have to remember is that the Quarles exception, the Supreme Court case, was about giving law enforcement some latitude in the immediate area around public safety to ask some questions.
Like, so right now, where is the gun is actually the
exactly. The Quarles case is a rape case, and somebody has a gun without a holster without a gun. Where's the gun? Right. That makes a lot of sense. But it was not designed to have a full and broad questioning of everything that ever happened. But the important piece to remember is that the government can ask suspects anything that they want. Right. But the Miranda and the Fifth Amendment actually limits what's admissible at court.
And so the admissibility. And so the risk you're running here, right? The risk you're running is a risk of inadmissibility because this part of the law, a public safety exception of this magnitude is as yet untested before the courts.
Absolutely.
And so the risk you're running, you're taking on some risk that what he wrote down on a pad, as far as the reporting, is not admissible. Although my sense, Don, is the government's fairly confident they can convict under these circumstances.
I would think even if somehow they lost some of his statement, I mean, there's so much other evidence. And, and if you look back to the Abdul Muttalib, the Christmas Day underwear bomb, as I understand it, the agents went to his bedside. They asked him his questions without Miranda, under the public safety exception, and those would have been admissible had he not pled guilty.
The surprising tweet of the weekend, Glenn Beck tweet, "I despise this terrorist and all that he's done, but we must not lose who we are. He's an American. Read him his rights. We are not Russia." Glenn Beck has a very narrow interpretation of the Quarles exception. John Borelli of the Soufan Group and Vince Warren for the Center for Constitutional Rights. Thank you both. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On September 5th, 2001, September 5th, President George W. Bush stood side by side with Mexican President Vicente Fox and talked about immigration reform as a goal worthy of our two great nations. A week later, immigration reform was a distant memory in the wake of the terror attacks on American soil. Now, 1 week after another terrifying mass casualty event, will immigration reform suffer the same fate once again? That's coming up.